or you open up a new trucking company, the DOT or the FMCA does not ask for your ID. So
which is
essentially, you can
wild.
imagine, I don't think it reduces fraud in any way. It'll just simplify the identification process.
Welcome to This Week in Trucking, the podcast that tells you what you need to know about the trucking market in 30 minutes or less. We're going to be talking about diesel prices, freight market trends, and the top stories that trucking business owners need to know. Hey, Gurvir, how's it going?
Going pretty well. How about you?
It's going good. It's going good. We went on a little hike.
It's
We're back at it.
Yeah, well, the weather's getting warm, so that's good. People are
It
coming
is.
out. Yeah, awesome. Let's see what we have in trucking this week.
Let's do it. All right. So for diesel prices, today's national average diesel price is 4,029. Yesterday's was 4,032 and last week was 4,056. So we are coming down a little bit from last week, which is always a good sign. Week had been pretty consistent from the month before. We are still down significantly from where we were a year ago. So a year ago we were at 416.7. So we're definitely down from that, but not as good news compared to earlier this year.
Yeah, I think for the first time we at some point even dipped below $4. That was
Yeah.
big. I think there was few global geopolitical tensions that people thought would push the price higher, and the whole Iran and Israel tensions did not escalate. I think that's contributing a little bit as well. But I think we would see prices roam around here. I hope to continue downwards a little bit more. That gives carriers some breathing room, but I think we'll probably see prices just around this 395 to 410, 405. I don't think we're going to see a significant increase in the next few months.
Let's hope. Let's hope. The highest prices by state are the normal contributors: California, Washington, Pennsylvania, New York, DC. These almost never change. But the 5 states with the lowest average diesel price are Oklahoma, which is pretty typical, but also Colorado, Mississippi, Kansas, and of course Texas. So you can usually depend on those Gulf states or near the southwest, mid-southwest, Texas, Oklahoma, to be pretty inexpensive diesel. But Kansas and Colorado are up there too, so not looking too bad in the Midwest either.
Yeah, Midwest is always a good place to fuel. I don't think these change much, Caroline. I think the most expensive states probably stay consistent.
They're pretty much always the same 5. So I rattle off those 5 states pretty much every week because they are always the most expensive diesel. If you're not
Yeah,
counting Hawaii, but I just don't think that there's a ton of people listening from
yeah.
Hawaii, but shout out if you are. But the 5 states with the cheapest fuel do change quite a bit. It's always good to keep an eye out on that and see what states where you should be fueling and where you should be avoiding.
Awesome.
So tell us what's happening in the freight market, Gurvir. What's going on this week?
Oh man, freight market. April is doing a little bit better, but not significantly better than February and March. So January start to this year was really good. January was a pretty good month and pump fake and making us thinking that the recovery is here. But then February and March, I think we dipped further. So for example, dry van rates 215 per mile in January, 206 in February, 201 in March. In April, we're hovering around $2. The month hasn't ended. So let's see where this month ends at. I think we'll probably be somewhere around March, but flatbed increased. So flatbed in January was 247, then in February 248, in March 250, in April 252. So flatbed, if you're a flatbed carrier, you're
Yeah.
probably noticing that, hey, look, you're probably getting decent rates and the rates are going up a little. And reefer is a similar story to dry van. 257 in January. In April, right now, we're at 232. March was 236. So we're still below March. Again, the month hasn't ended. So let's see where this month ends. But the capacity continues to exit. We're still seeing, if you look at the total truck posts from last month, they're down about 6%, but the load posts are up, essentially telling us that, hey, look, capacity is still leaving, carriers are still going out of business, loads are increasing a little bit. And that just means, hey, we're getting closer and closer to the equilibrium where we have equal amount of trucks to equal amount of freight. And that's when rates will improve, right? So hopefully, I think towards Q3 of this year, we're going to see an improvement. But I think May, June, July, all our produce months, so we're going to see some increases there. Let's see what that looks like next month. But yeah, not a big improvement, not a huge improvement, but I do know that we are getting closer to that equilibrium. So the rates will improve at some point. I even heard reports saying that it's going to be here within 12 months, right? Like the recovery, we just don't know when exactly is it going to get here? Is it going to get here in the next 3 to 4 months, or is it more going to be like 8 to 9 months? But small improvements. We're seeing positive signs, but not a huge recovery.
Yeah. How do you know when the industry has hit bottom? And how
Yeah.
long does it stay there on the bottom? Because it just feels like for months we've been saying pretty much the same thing, that the recovery will be on its way. We just don't know when. We think the market is bottoming out, but we've been scraping along the bottom for a while here. We're now down to an average van rate of $2 a mile. That's,
Yeah.
for some people, that's their cost per mile. So
Yeah. No,
what's going
totally.
on here? How can we tell when we've actually hit rock bottom?
Yeah, usually it's in hindsight you can tell better. Like today, we understand better that last May was the lowest point. So we've already actually passed the lowest point. It was actually last year. One of the trackers that I like to look at is the rejection rate. I think once we hit 8 to 9% rejection rate, I think we're at an equilibrium. Right now, we're still hovering around that 4%. But once we hit that, even seven, like 7 to 9, I think that's when we will see that, hey, look, I think we've reached an equilibrium. That's a target. And then you can start feeling it on load boards as well. That's a big thing as well. When you're calling brokers, when you're talking to brokers, you can feel that the market is getting tight. So we'll look at the numbers. Also, occasionally, I like to talk to my dad and see, hey, what kind of rates are you getting?
Yeah.
Are you dictating rates, or are the brokers dictating rates? That's also going to be an indicator as well, because brokers know what's going on in the market, right? They're going to know when the tightness comes.
Yeah, for sure. They're talking to so many carriers about a single load, then they know they can
Yeah,
drive the price
exactly.
down,
Yeah,
right? If
and they
they're
have to be
only
experts
being
on
able,
pricing. Yeah,
and if they're only
yeah,
able to get a hold of one or two carriers that are willing to take a load, now they're going to be more affable,
totally.
right?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's not going to be an instant switch. Typically, freight is like about a 6 year cycle where 2 years are equilibrium. So you have equal amount of trucks and equal amount of loads, and loads increase, and then the rates go up because now you have more loads than trucks. That lasts about 2 years, give or take. And then when load prices go up, people add a lot of trucks, right? Like people that have one truck add
Yeah.
two, people that have a fleet of 5 trucks add like another 3 or 4, and then now you have too many trucks and not enough loads, and then prices start to come down. So this is typically about a
Yeah.
6 year cycle.
Yeah. All right. We will keep an eye on this and keep reporting back every week and with our take on it. Gurvir, what story do you have for us today? What do you think is the most important story in trucking lately?
I read a story about renewable diesel electric vehicles in trucking.
Yeah.
Apparently, if renewable diesel is significantly cheaper and more operationally effective than transitioning to electric vehicles for long haul trucking. I think the number that I've heard is that transitioning to EVs in trucking would cost about $1 trillion in over 15 years, compared to $203 billion for renewable diesel. So this is a big conversation that, hey, how do you support electric trucks? How would you manage the weight of the batteries? How do you build all these charging stations and the infrastructure? You just can't get rid of all the truck stops and diesel. So how does this transition actually occurs? So a new report finds that it's going to actually cost a lot of money. And maybe the alternative choice is that you go towards renewable diesel. And the carbon emissions are approximately like 50% lower when trucks are using renewable diesel. And that actually could be an alternative choice. US is also drilling more oil. Maybe there's an angle there to continue this diesel consumption in trucking for some time and push back the EV transition. So I thought that was interesting. You would go to conferences, you would go to meet different people, and they all said, hey, look, it's actually really expensive. Not many people knew the number, but just thinking out loud about the problem, that would take a lot of money to transition from diesel into EVs because there's a lot of infrastructure missing. Now, in local port, and that's where I think this use case could work when you're only traveling 200 miles a day, 250,
Right.
you come back to the charging station. Buying energy is also a question. It can get really expensive, especially during peak hours. So, a lot of questions, a lot of interesting conversations. But I think the renewable diesel might be a better option.
Super interesting conversation. I think that really surprised that no one was talking about this at the Mid America Truck Show. And I get
Yeah.
that a lot of what Matt's is this love affair with diesel trucks, right?
Yeah.
A lot of it was that, and people who want to come to the truck show to see these incredible vehicles, some of them more historical vehicles. And so I get that electric and renewable fuels is not necessarily going to be a super popular topic with most of the people there. Honestly, with the climate crisis the way it is, it's unbelievable to me that no one was talking about that, right? Because there are so
Yeah.
many companies and so many businesses working on that. And it doesn't really seem that anyone is actually consulting with and talking to drivers about
Yeah.
this. And they are the ones that stand to benefit a lot from it or really hurt from this transition.
Yeah.
So either of those things. And there will be benefits and drawbacks any transition. But the people who are going to be the most affected are the drivers and the owner operators. And it was just surprising
Yeah.
to me that it didn't seem like there was any effort to try to engage the
Yeah.
people who are going to be the most affected by it. One
Yeah.
of the things that,
It's a tough conversation to have, right? Like I remember you were telling me you attended that event at Matt's about what is it, driving,
autonomous
autonomous
vehicles.
driving, and you got the techies, you got the engineers that are working on this problem, and it's a tough
Yeah.
conversation to have because at the end of the day, it is elimination of jobs. And
Yeah.
it's a tough
Yeah.
conversation to talk to somebody whose job you're going to eliminate. But you also are talking about progress and making the technology better. And I don't think a lot of people know how to
Yeah.
talk about this.
And I give them a lot of credit for going. That's to get up in front of a group of truck drivers and talk about autonomous vehicles and how it's important to have drivers in that transition and listen to
Yeah.
their concerns and questions. Like, I give a lot of credit to that company, and I can't remember who it was, but we'll link them in the description. But I just give them a lot of credit for going to Matt's and talking about it and hearing from people, even if it's maybe not exactly what they wanted to hear.
Yeah.
But with the transition to electric or renewable fuels is a different conversation. And
Yep.
I talked to a couple of drivers just picking their brains about the conversation around the transition to electric. They had really good questions and really good concerns and really intelligent responses. It wasn't all political, or they had really interesting things to say. And so I think that if anyone is working in that space, there's a huge opportunity to engage drivers in on that conversation.
Totally, totally. No, yeah, definitely. I think it'll be interesting to see how these things change the industry. But yeah, I think definitely there's still some challenges for the technology. Like
Yeah.
how do you have electric vehicles infrastructure, and then how do you make autonomous driving fully successful? Let's see.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So I think one of the biggest stories that came out of the Mid America Truck Show last month was the announcement from the FMCSA that they are overhauling their registration system for motor carriers, freight brokers, and freight forwarders in an effort to combat fraud and improve the user experience. So some of the key changes here is that they're going to end or phase out the use of MC numbers in favor of USDOT numbers as the sole identifier, and they're going to be implementing new verification tools to try and combat fraudulent. So these are an aim to address all of the security concerns about fraudulent carriers and brokers on load boards stealing freight or rebrokering freight illegally. And this initiative is really a pretty big shift toward modernization, but there are a lot of people who are really concerned about this, that potentially getting rid of MC numbers might even make it worse, might even make it easier for people to commit fraud. So how much of this did you hear about at the Mid America Truck Show, and what are some of your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I've been hearing about this for a long time. When we started Bobtail, we're like, hey, why are these two numbers used as identifiers to identify a trucking company? I think CS has talked about this for some time, of getting rid of MC numbers. It is redundant, and I think it costs them a lot of money to manage these two things. But yes, simplification is better. I just don't understand how it would prevent fraud unless they actually integrate identity verification and business verification tools with the DOT numbers, right? So just eliminating MC numbers, I don't think it reduces fraud in any way. It'll just simplify the identification process and just the registration process, and just having one unique DO number to identify the company. But I think there has to be some sort of a KYB, KYC process where you're identifying the ownership of that. I think that's probably the most effective way. Because right now, if you register your D number or you open up a new trucking company, yeah, the DOT or the FMCA does not ask for your ID. So
Which is
essentially, you can
wild.
imagine, yeah, you can
That's
imagine that
crazy. Like, you
yeah.
can't get anything showing ID from
Yeah.
the government. Like, why is
Yep.
this
And
any
you simply
different?
just fill out a form. You can put in any name if you want, hypothetically, right? And just get a company under Caroline's name. Caroline wouldn't even know about it. But yeah, they don't actually have a verification process in place right now. So I think that would help. I wish, yeah. Let's see what they do on that end. Is it going to be like a thorough upload your license and we'll verify you and then get your DOT number? Let's see what that process looks like.
Yeah, there are plenty of other processes that you have to go through with government agencies where you have to get on a quick video call and show them your
Yeah.
ID and show them that you are who you say you are. I lived in Ecuador for about a decade, and pretty much every government process there had that in
Yeah.
place. So
Yeah.
sometimes I came back a year ago and looked around to some of the government bureaucracy in the US and thought, wow, we are decades behind a South. This is wild. So I think that you're right. The NC and DOT number seems redundant, but just getting rid of one number I don't think is going to change much of anything. I'm interested to
Yeah.
see what those ID verification look like. And I'm not so much looking forward to updating all of the information on the Bobtail website that we have about how to get started with your trucking company, because we have so much about MC numbers on there. But we'll
Yeah.
make sure that as soon as things do go
Hopefully,
into effect, we will
hopefully it's
make those
just
changes.
yeah. Hopefully it's just removing the MC number. It's not like a huge change in process, but let's see. Yeah.
We will see. One little mini story that I want to note is that the FreightWaves Q1 2024 carrier report also came out in the last couple of weeks. There's been a decrease in 9,000 net active truckload operating authorities since the start of November. That is a 12% uptick exits compared to the last year. So this means that we know capacity is leaving the market and that there has been a slight increase in tender rejection rates and spot rate averages over the last year, but we still have that oversupply. So people, if
Yeah.
you want to know more about these cycles, to go back and look at that report.
Yeah, and you won't feel this in the market to all the owner operators and drivers, but there's 9% more freight than last year. But that just means that there's oversupply. That's why you're not feeling it when you're picking up loads on the load board. And but we're seeing a lot of positive signs. A difference between spot and contract rate is shortening. That's a good sign, actually. So yeah, even though we're seeing a lot of positive signs, there's still a bit of an oversupply, like you said. So yeah, definitely check out that report.
All right. We're going to go into a couple of comments and questions that we found here on those infamous trucking Facebook groups. So, first is from who said, posted a truck on DAT last night, received a call from someone saying that they were with Landstar Ranger with a rate almost too good. We played into it and shortly after hanging up received a code from Navisphere, which is what CH Robinson uses. They then called us back asking for the code, which I refused to give. Told him I was on the phone with Landstar and the call ended. Just one example of someone trying to scam us owner operators.
Yeah, definitely a rate too good to be true is one of the red flags. If you ever
For sure.
and owner operators, drivers who are booking loads for a few months, they'll sense it that, hey, look, this rate is unusual and I should not be getting paid this much right now. So definitely a red flag. Definitely be aware of that. But seems like this is a different kind of fraud. It seems like they wanted to get a login for the carrier into their CH Robinson portal where they can then book loads, I would assume, right? Just
Yeah.
essentially book loads, all CH Robinson loads, and then rebroker them using a load board and get out. Thing about these schemes, Caroline, is that you have to first get a load and you have to steal someone's identity or somehow get a load. That's the only way that you can broker a load. So the first step is, how do they get loads? That's usually done with stealing someone's carrier identity, right? Changing the email address, using their DOT number, MC number. The bigger carriers know, and they do all of these load tenders through their portal. But a lot of the smaller brokers, they email rate confirmations, and that's where I think a lot of the fraud happens. But it seems like in this case, they were trying to get into and essentially, I think, book loads so that then they can double broker them out and not pay the carriers that actually delivered it. Definitely beware. Don't be sharing any codes that you receive on your phone with anyone else. This is like a
Definitely
Facebook
not.
type fraud as well. But yeah.
Yeah, I think if anyone is asking you to send them a code that you were texted, that's not right there.
Yeah,
You
usually
should you
you're
should stop.
asked to put the code into a portal or a website or somewhere, right?
Right.
Nobody's asking you, hey, I sent you a code. Can you give it to me? That's fishy and they're trying to get into your system somewhere.
Totally. Totally. So be very careful out there. All right, next question from does Non-recourse cost more. That depends on how you look at it. You can pay a couple percent more for peace of mind, for not having to chase your money, for saving the time and the headache, try and chase a bad debtor. I pay that extra percent every day to know that I am paid for every load I haul and that my factor is never going to charge me back for something if they don't get paid. So this is talking about non-recourse factoring. Obviously, at Bobtail, we have a lot of experience with factoring and learning about other companies' factoring processes and policies. Gurvir, talk to me about non-recourse. Is it all it's cracked up to be? Is it what Jennifer is promising?
Yeah, not really. So I think she said every load. I think that is not true. So let's revisit what is non-recourse. Non-recourse essentially means that your factoring company takes the responsibility. So if the broker doesn't pay,
Right.
then the factoring company is not going to come back to you and charge you for it. But there's a lot of exceptions and restrictions around that, right? The first is that broker actually has to go out of business. So if it's a dispute, if it is a double brokered load where you got scammed, that doesn't non-recourse does not cover that. Right. So
Right.
it does not give you 100% guarantee. Right. I don't think there's anything out there that gives you 100% guarantee, but yeah, it does give you some insurance though. Last year, we did see some brokers go out of business. So yeah, it could be some protection against those types of brokers. But just remember that it is only if a broker goes out of business, but also read your factoring contracts, right? They do change and some factoring companies might do it differently. But as far as I remember, and I know that it's typically when a broker is insolvent. If there's a dispute, a claim, if there is a fraudulent load involved, I believe that is a carrier's responsibility. It does cost more. She's right about that. And for some carriers, it might be worth it to not have that headache. So it's a personal preference. I just don't think enough brokers go out of business in a given year. Last year was a sort of an exception. We're sort of out of that period, but that's something that a carrier should evaluate. Hey, for peace of mind, do they want to pay extra, or do they just want to carry that risk and take ownership of that risk and just pay a little bit less? But yeah, typically it does cost more, but it doesn't cover every single load. You have to be very careful about that. So definitely read the contract that you're signing with a factoring company. That will tell you exactly what is covered and what is not.
I think the mistake that a lot of people make is thinking of recourse and non-recourse as black and white.
Yeah.
It really is more on a spectrum. So I think there are
Yeah.
agreements that are non-recourse that will give you more protection, and there are non-recourse agreements that will give you less protection. And then there are
Yeah.
recourse agreements that will give you a little bit more protection, and then recourse agreements that really won't do anything. So I would say when I characterize Bobtail, we are a recourse factoring agreement, and I would say that we're in the middle of that spectrum. So we are a recourse factoring agreement, but we out of our way to make sure that you get paid on absolutely everything you can possibly get paid on. And that includes going to brokers and working with them directly, following up with all of your customers every day until they pay your invoices, being really on the pulse of what's happening with those brokers, and filing
Yeah.
claims or collections when needed to try and get you paid. Not most other recourse factoring companies won't do those things. It really is on a spectrum, and I think that's how people should be thinking about it. And it's probably from absolute cheapest rate to most expensive rate as well.
Yeah, and you get what you pay for, right? So if you're paying for service, you're paying for all these things, then I think you'll be fine. Sometimes a cheap rate comes with you doing your own collections, right? And a lot of these things are going to fall on you. So definitely be aware, read the reviews of your factoring company, read the contract, know exactly what you are getting yourself into. I think that's the best way to do these things.
Couldn't agree more. All right. Thank you so much for joining me, Gurvir. And thanks for listening, everybody. We will see you next week.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Drive safe.